Matthew chapter 2, verse 13 to 23 talks about Jesus in Egypt, baby Jesus in Egypt and returned to Nazareth. And apparently that happened because Herod ordered to kill all the boys in Bethlehem and its vicinity who were 2 years old and under. Can you please explain the massacre of so many newborn babies during the birth of Jesus? What was God's plan through this? And here we also find Jesus going to Egypt, Moses typology, Pastor. Would you explain on this?
When we think of Christmas, all our decorations and cakes and kalkals, I think we need to recognize the reality of a passage like this. This is also part of the Christmas story. And any reader who finds this problematic is a good reader. And good questions should come from our mind. Herod, the moment he realized that these wise men have tricked him, they were wise enough to trick him, decides to kill all the babies in Bethlehem area who are below 2 years old. Now, just to let you know, Bethlehem would have been a very small town, very small village. Okay? And so there would not have been like too many babies, 2 or under. So first thing, we must not imagine there are hundreds of babies have been killed. No, it's not like a big city. A few, maybe a dozen or two, I don't know. Because we don't have any access to this information in any other writing. But even if it's one baby, it is tragic. It is very, very sad. And so this sad part of the story, I am hesitant to use the word God's plan for many things that happen. Because when we say it is God's plan, God becomes responsible for that. Now, of course, in our thinking, we have this whole framework. Does not God know everything? Yeah, God knows many things, but God does not direct it. God does not control it. So God is not in control of everything that is happening. There is a lot of tragedy that happens in the world. Terrible things, like 6 million Jews were killed during the time of Hitler. 6 million. Not a few children like this. And does God plan that? No. God never plans any of this. But tragedy is part of human life. So Herod is like a pharaoh in this story. It's slightly interesting, even though he's like a pharaoh, wants to kill the children, and yet to escape him, Jesus and family go into Egypt. So very interesting turnaround here. So Jesus' family is reenacting the story of Genesis. Remember, to survive, the family of Jacob had to go into Egypt. In the same way, Israel went into Egypt and Israel comes out. That's why we read in verse 15. Again, he'll use that fulfill formula. He said, this fulfilled what the Lord had said to the prophet, out of Egypt I called my son. That is Hosea 11:1. Now, Israel, by the way, is called God's son. And God brings him out of Egypt. And see the play here. Jesus is also God's son, and he's also returning from Egypt. And but it mentions the sadness of Israel. The families who have lost their babies, we don't know how many, are weeping. And here he picks up a passage from the Old Testament. He picks up a passage from Jeremiah 31 and verse 15. Now, that is about Rachel. Rachel here is a picture of Israel, and Israel is weeping because of the exile. They have lost the children. They have gone off to the Babylonian exile. And so it's a picture of unrelieved suffering of innocence. This is the complication in the world. Innocent suffering is part of this world, and the problem is not resolved yet. We have to wait for the day of the Lord. So we have to be very careful whenever there is suffering, not to attribute it to either God or to the sins of these people. That's very important. Sometimes Christians make the mistake of even saying maybe some generational curse or things like that. So here is a very sad way. Rachel is mentioned. Interestingly, Rachel, wife of Jacob, died on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. You read that in Genesis 35:19. So again, Matthew loves to see resonances in that story, and he says Jesus' family is now going to come. They are from Bethlehem, but now that they are coming out of Egypt, where will they go? He says, because the Herod's son, by this time Herod is dead. That is about 4 BC. And Herod, when he dies, 3 of his sons inherit the kingdom. Galilee and Perea went to his son Antipas, Herod Antipas. But his son, who was also a terrible guy, Archelaus, he is now overseeing Judea, Samaria, and Idumea. But very soon in AD 6, the Romans took it over and they appointed their own governor. And one of those Roman governors, was Pontius Pilate. So they go away to where Antipas, somehow they feel he's not that harsh. And so they go to a place called Nazareth, a small town called Nazareth. And again, Matthew says something very interesting and very intriguing. He says, this was fulfilled what was said through the prophets, that he would be called a Nazarene. Now the problem is, when you look for which prophet would have said that he's a Nazarene, not a single prophet has specifically said that. So we struggle with, what did Matthew, the gospel writer, have in mind when he says the prophet said he was from Nazareth? Now, there are different possibilities, and I may mention where I lean towards. One of the things that we see is Nazareth is a very small village. Some estimations are maybe in the time of Jesus, some 400-500 people. It's a small village. Insignificant, despised. That's why, remember in John 1:46, Nathanael will say, can anything good come out of Nazareth? It's a small, despised town. And maybe there is this resonance of Isaiah 53 verse 3. He was despised. Oh, he's a Nazarene. But when you read the Greek there is this play on Nazarean, Nazarios. It's difficult to say what does it mean. Does it mean from Nazareth? What I lean towards is, and some others too, is the word, there's a play on words. I think he's playing on words. The word netzer in Hebrew means the branch. And that is a well-known word used for the Messiah in the Old Testament. Isaiah 11:1, the branch. And so that idea is probably behind this idea that he's the Messiah. A few others think maybe it has some connection with Nazir, like the Nazarites who had to live a holy life, like Samson, Numbers 6. So these are the different possibilities. I tend to lean towards netzer, that Jesus was some resonance of the branch. So when Matthew says the prophets, he is looking at the text in a very creative, way, pointing towards he's not specifically referring to one verse in the Old Testament. Well, all this to say, going back to the typology of Moses. Just like Moses was saved from being killed by Pharaoh, Jesus is saved from being killed by Herod. And like Moses brought out Israel from Egypt, Jesus representing Israel is coming out of Egypt, and Jesus is going to be Israel of God, and we become Israel of God in him. And therefore, in the Gospel of Matthew, the teachings of Jesus will be greater than the teachings of Moses. He will say, you have heard it, it is written, but I say to you. So the Jesus is the new, greater Moses that the people of God are waiting for. So there's a lot of rich significance that we can see here. Role of God's guidance, God's directions. Of course, some of these are very unique, and I would like to warn people, don't depend just on what you say you saw and God told you whatever. It's always good, because God has put us in a church, in community, to discern what God is speaking to us in community, so that we don't go off in a wrong direction.